Chapter 7 of Part 1 of the Lives of the Three Mrs. Judsons. This recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7. Difficulty of inculcating the gospel. Death of her son. Failure of Mr. Judson's health. Arrival of Mr. and Mrs. Hugh at Rangoon. In a letter which Mrs. Judson wrote to her sisters in December 1815, she says: "Doubtless you expect by this time that some of the Burmans have embraced the Christian religion, or at least are seriously inquiring respecting it. But you cannot imagine how very difficult it is to give them any idea of the true God and the way of salvation by Christ, since their present ideas of deity are so very low. They have not the least idea of divinity, who is eternal, without beginning or end. All their deities have been through the several grades of creatures, from a fowl to a god. They know of no other atonement for sin than offering to their priests or their pagadaws." She goes on to mention some instances of serious inquiry among the people, which from time to time had raised their hopes, only to dash them again by the relapse of the inquirers into indifference. But adds: "These things do not discourage us. It is God alone who can effectually impress the mind with divine truths, and though seed may lie buried long in the dust, yet at some future period it may spring up and bear fruit to the glory of God." In this letter she gives an account of the recall of the Viceroy from Rangoon to Ava, the imperial residence, and the consequent confusion of the people, 10,000 of whom accompanied him to Ava. She regretted his departure, as both he and his lady had ever treated her with civility and kindness. The newly appointed Viceroy was a stranger, and might not be equally kind to them. She says: "Oh, how I long to visit Bradford, to spend a few evenings by your firesides, in telling you what I have seen and heard. Alas! we have no fireside, no social circle. We are still alone in this miserable country, surrounded by thousands, ignorant of the true God. But we still feel happy in our employment, and have reason to thank God that he has brought us here. We do hope to live to see the Scriptures translated into the Burman language, and a church formed among these idolaters." Her next letter details, with all the pathos of a mother's sorrow, a new trial, to which they were called by him, who through clouds and darkness are about him, yet doeth all things well. May 7th, 1816. My dear parents, little did I think when I wrote you last that my next letter would be filled with the melancholy subject upon which I must now write. Death, regardless of our lonely situation, has entered our dwelling, and made one of the happiest of our families wretched. Our little Roger Williams, our only little darling boy, was 3 days ago laid in the silent grave. 8 months we enjoyed the precious little gift, in which he had so completely entwined himself around his parents' heart that his existence seemed necessary to their own. But God has taught us by affliction what we would not learn by mercies, that our hearts are his exclusive property, and whatever rival intrudes, he will tear it away. He was a remarkably pleasant child, never cried except when in pain, and what we often observed to each other was the most singular: he never, during his little existence, manifested the least anger or resentment at anything. This was not owing to the want of intellect, for his tender feelings of sensibility were very conspicuous. Whenever I or his father passed his cradle without taking him, he would follow us with his eyes to the door, when they would fill with tears. His countenance, so expressive of grief, though perfectly silent, that it would force us back to him, which would cause his little heart to be so joyful as it had before been sorrowful. He would lie hours on a mat by his papa's study table, or by the side of his chair on the floor. If he could only see his face when we had finished study or the business of the day! It was our exercise and amusement to carry him around the house or garden. Though we were alone, we felt not our solitude when he was with us." Her account of his last sickness and death follows, and she adds: "Thus died our little Roger. Short pain, short grief, dear babe, was thine. Now joys eternal and divine." We buried him in the afternoon of the same day, in a little enclosure the other side of the garden. 40 or 50 Burmans and Portuguese followed with his afflicted parents, the last remains of the silent grave. All the Burmans who were acquainted with us tried to sympathize with us and console us under our loss. We do not feel a disposition to murmur or inquire of our Sovereign why he has done this. We wish rather to sit down submissively under the rod and bear the smart, till the end for which the affliction was sent shall be accomplished. Our hearts were bound up in this child. We felt he was our earthly all, our only source of innocent recreation in this heathen land. But God saw it was necessary to remind us of our error, and strip us of our little all. Oh, may it not be in vain that he has done it. May we so improve it that he will stay his hand and say, "It is enough." A while after this she writes, "Since worship I have stolen away to a much loved spot, where I love to sit and pay the tribute of affection to my lost darling child. It is a little enclosure of mango trees, in the center of which is erected a small bamboo house, on a rising spot of ground which looks down on the new made grave of our infant boy. Here I now sit, and though all nature around wears a most delightful and romantic appearance, yet my heart is sad, and my tears frequently stop my pen. You, my dear Mrs. L., who are a mother, may imagine my sensations. But if you have never lost a firstborn, an only son, you can never know my pain. Had you even buried your little boy, you are in a Christian country, surrounded by friends and relatives, who could soothe your anguish and direct your attention to other objects. But behold us, solitary and alone, with this one source of recreation. Yet this is denied us. This must be removed, to show us that we need no other source of enjoyment but God himself. Do not think I write thus, that I repine at the dealings of Providence. No, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Though I say with the prophet, "Behold, and see if there be any sorrow like unto my sorrow," yet I would also say, "It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not." God is the same when he afflicts us as when he is merciful, just as worthy of our entire trust and confidence now as when he entrusted us with the precious little gift. There is a bright side even to this heavy affliction. The following tender and beautiful effusion was written by the Rev. J. Lawson, of the Serampore Mission, and presented to Mrs. Judson on the occasion. As it has not been published in former notices of Mrs. J., we take pleasure in inserting it here. Hushed be the murmuring thought, thy will be done. O Arbiter of life and death, I bow to thy command. I yield the precious gift so late bestowed, and to the silent grave move sorrowing, yet submissive. O sweet babe, I lay thee down to rest. The cold, cold earth a pillow for thy little head. Sleep on. Serene in death, no care shall trouble thee. All undisturbed thou slumberest, far more still than when I lulled thee in my lap, and soothed thy little sorrows till they ceased. Then felt thy mother peace. Her heart was light as the sweet sigh that scaped thy placid lips, and joyous as the dimpled smile that played across thy countenance. Oh, I must weep to think of thee, dear infant, on my knees, untroubled, sleeping. Bending o'er thy form, I watched with eager hope to catch the laugh, first waking from thy sparkling eye, a beam, lovely to me as the blue light of heaven. Dimmed in death's agony, it beams no more. Oh, yet once more I kiss thy marble lips, sweet babe, and I press with mine thy whitened cheeks. Farewell, a long farewell, yet visit me in dreams, my darling. Though the visioned joy wake bitter pangs, still be thou in my thoughts, and I will cherish the dear dream, and think I still possess thee. Peace, my bursting heart. Oh, I submit. Again I lay thee down. Dear relic of a mother's hope, thy spirit, now mingled with cherubic hosts, adores that grace that ransomed it, and lodged it safe above the stormy scene. She then gives an interesting account of a visit paid them by the wife of the Viceroy, who, on hearing of the death of the little white child, as she called him, came to condole with his parents. She was attended by about 200 of her officers of state and members of her household, expressed great sympathy in Mrs. Judson's affliction, and reproached her for not having sent her word that she might have come to the funeral. Mrs. Judson says, "I regaled her with tea, sweetmeats, and cakes, with which she seemed much pleased." She adds, I sometimes have good opportunities of communicating religious truths to the woman in the government house, and I hope I shall have an opportunity of conversing with the wife of the Viceroy himself. Oh, that she might become a real disciple of Jesus!" In the same melancholy letter she relates another affliction. Mr. Judson, who had frequently been asked by the natives, "Where are your religious books?" had been diligently employed in preparing a tract in the Burman language called A Summary of Christian Truth, when his nervous system, and especially his head, became so afflicted that he was obliged to lay aside all study and seriously think of a voyage to Calcutta as his only means of restoration. But he was prevented from executing his design by the joyful news that 2 additional missionaries were about to join them. Mr. and Mrs. Hugh from America arrived in Rangoon in October 1816, and brought with them as a present from the mission at Serampore a printing press, with a fount of types in the Burman character than which nothing could have been more acceptable. Can we wonder that after laboring in loneliness and sorrow 3 years, such an event as this should fill their hearts with joy and consolation? The Burmans were very generally taught to read, though having little that is attractive in their own literature, and books being scarce and dear. They could not, at the time of which we write, be said to be a reading people. Still, the fact that numbers were able to read was a strong encouragement to print tracts and books for them. On the occasion of printing the tract above mentioned and a catechism, Mr. Hugh writes thus: "These 2 little tracts are the first printing ever done in Burmah, and it is a fact grateful to every Christian feeling that God has reserved the introduction of this art here for his own use." End of chapter 7.